hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
I traveled to the city of Chennai in Tamil Nadu, South India. I traveled with and supported groups of students who had committed to 2 weeks of educational immersion and justice service to Dalit people, also known as untouchables. Let me tell you, there was a lot of risk involved in those trips. There was the risk of exhaustion. 3 crowded flights, traveling in economy class for 24 hours straight. There was the risk of illness from fellow travelers in the too close confines of the airplanes, from unfamiliar microbes ingested through food or water, from underlying health conditions undiscovered until they struck in surprising and frightening ways. There was the risk of vulnerability. Not knowing the languages, even with English sounding so unfamiliar. Not knowing the customs, despite months of study and preparation. Not knowing how to prevent yourself from being stupid or insensitive or overwhelmed and so emotionally withdrawn. During these trips to India, I witnessed and experienced all these risks and more. We all became exhausted, so much so that even sleep eluded us. Some of us became ill from the airplane and from food and water and from those pesky underlying health conditions. On 3 of the 4 trips, I had to take students to hospital. And let me tell you, the hospitals in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, they carry their own risks. And we were all, at one time or another, though not usually all at once, we were all stupid, insensitive, overwhelmed, and emotionally withdrawn. Still, the whole expedition every time was worth the risk. Every year, as we planned these trips and recruited students, we had to factor risk into everything. Communications, logistics, lesson plans, spiritual practices. The students drawn to these journeys, they generally were drawn to taking a few risks. We spent a lot of time reminding them how to stay as safe as possible. Rest, hand sanitize, drink only bottled water, pause before you open your mouth or your wallet. Stay with the group physically and emotionally. Parents, more often than not, needed to be persuaded that the risks were all managed. Why should their sweet darlings, their beloved children, be put at risk? Why were they putting themselves at risk? Why were they going so far away into dirty and dangerous places? We planners, we worked with good partners in country, partners who would be our translators and our troubleshooters. These partners became our teachers and those who would forgive our stupidity, our insensitivity, our overwhelmed emotional withdrawal. Those partners protected us, loved us, and valued us every time. Now, what really were we doing through all this risky business, taking all these risks? Certainly, these journeys were exciting. The very risk part of the lure of the adventure. There were thrills, even some danger. I kid you not. At one point, we found ourselves on a bus, on a 4-lane highway, going the wrong way. I have never been so terrified in my life. And indeed, it was actually not as dangerous as the normal traffic. With the Mack trucks, big, and the Greyhound buses, and the minibuses, and the sedans, and the motorcycles with 4 people on them, including babies, and the auto rickshaws, and the human-pulled rickshaws, and the cattle-drawn carts, and the human-drawn carts, and the pedestrians, and the cows. I suppose they belong up here. All of us fighting for the same road space. Harrowing to say the least. Simply driving from place to place went a long way to satisfying the thrill-seeking types among us. Our partners in India always took good care of us, managing even the risk of roadways and worrisome water sources. They were responsible for our safety and security. And you might wonder why they bothered to take all that risk upon themselves, why they would put themselves at risk to aid people they didn't know and whom they might never see again. It was upon a different notion of risk, the risk of relationship, the risk of community. That's where our journeys intersected. We were all of us, both sojourners and hosts, risking vulnerability to learn from each other and to perhaps change in the exchange. I didn't really have to travel halfway around the world to experience the risk of relationship, the risk of vulnerability. These experiences highlighted, though, the reasons that the active search for community is worth it every time, whether you're in southern India or in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Still, those trips were part of my formation, teaching me what it was that mattered most to me, teaching me how I wanted ultimately to orient my life. Because we are all here together on this fine Sunday morning, safe and secure within the sheltering walls of our church, I have a strong feeling that you know as well as I do that the possibility for community, with all the risk involved in creating it, is right here, right now, within each of us, if we are only willing to take the risk of showing up and reaching out. We've got the showing up part down, don't we? Here you all are. Take a minute and look around, especially behind you. I invite you to wave at your neighbor, to shout out a greeting. Give a little bow of acknowledgement to people you don't know or don't know well. Here among those of us gathered are the seeds of relationship and the evidence of risk-taking. That may seem a bit odd in a place which also offers so much comfort when we most need it. As Janet Rand reminds us of, the person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. He or she may avoid suffering and sorrow, but he or she simply cannot learn, feel, change, grow, love. That is, he or she cannot live. Only a person who risks is free. That's a pretty strong statement. Maybe even a little cruel in its baldness. It strikes me as true, and it's good to acknowledge that without risk, we risk atrophy. We risk dying on the vine. What a waste of sunshine and good soil, dry on a Sunday morning. For years, I lived a life discovering and creating knowledge about literature, how stories open up the possibility of truth and meaning. In many ways, it did not feel to me like a risky life. I loved teaching, working with students, preferred it to research really. But I didn't see, while I was doing it, that the deeply relational aspect of teaching was what most drew me to focus so much of my time and energy there. I loved the chance to hear developing perspectives, open and active struggles toward meaning in the midst of confusion. I felt privileged to witness understandings different from my own, because filtered through experience of all kinds unlike my own. Now, of course, I was a teacher, and so I tried to do some correcting of very errant or vapid opinions. I never used a red pen, though. I used green. But mainly I focused on techniques for digging deeper and then waiting to see what emerged. That's how I learned. And that's how I felt good in learning. In this way, creating common stories and common ways to read, we shared a community of learners with differentiated ideas, all valid and evocative. That was the best of what I did as a teacher. But I didn't really understand at the time the deep significance of what this unacknowledged community. An experience from one of my India trips illustrates what creating community through acts of meaning-making looks like. We were visiting a clinic where one of the Catholic sisters was renowned for her ability to successfully treat snake bite. This was also a follow-up visit for one of the Jesuit brothers. He had been bitten by a snake. Yes, there were snakes where we were staying. I didn't know that until we went to the clinic. The sister didn't speak much English. The sun was very hot as we stood, and the conversation had drifted into town. It got more and more challenging for all of us to stay present and engaged. As the sister spoke with our translator, the recovering snake-bitten brother, and the Jesuit priest who oversaw the school where we were living, I thought I heard her say the word urine. I must have perked up a bit because our translator indicated that, yes, they were talking about urine therapy, including ingesting one's own urine for medicinal purposes. Well, the students perked up too at that moment, fascinated and disgusted by that piece of Eastern medicine, so different from the Western medicine they trusted implicitly. You know, we don't ingest anything awful in Western medicine, do we? Around and around the small circle, the sister explained, and the Jesuits asked questions. They explained, and she asked questions. Around and around the conversation went until everyone's idea had been aired fully, until everyone entertained the possibility that urine therapy was a good idea, as well as the strong sense that it was not a good idea at all. No one's mind was necessarily changed by that exchange. No one who thought urine therapy a very bad idea decided now to drink, to embrace it after the sister explained it thoroughly. Everyone, though, knew a bit more than she or he had before the conversation began. They all knew some ideas they had to put in relationship with other ideas, and they all knew more about each other as human beings. What really happened was an exchange of deep understanding and deep respect on the occasion of completely disputed opinions. They all stayed in the conversation, respectfully and openly, desiring to understand each other's point of view and point of reference. They did not allow their differences of opinion to shape their mutual regard for one another. They did not dismiss the other's experience and knowledge, acknowledging instead that there was much to know and learn, that no one had a lock on all possibilities, that the impossible might just be right. Time might tell. In the exchange, they deepened community. They enacted community, where sharing of differences creates bridges of understanding. It's not persuasion to one's point of view that creates relationship. It's not judgment about the truth of another's knowledge that ensures the ability to seek conversation. Rather, the act of sharing across difference is precisely the foundation of true relationship. These Indian brothers and sisters did not see eye to eye at all, but that was all the more reason for them to stand in a circle together and keep the conversation going. This is an important story to me because I admire and envy this ability to remain in relationship across fundamental non-agreement. It must be what seasoned diplomats can do, finding ways to not just tolerate, but enjoy and commit to so-called enemies. It is what we are all called to do in this time of deep division within our society, where even the facts are questioned, where everything is political first. I am called to be in relationship with people who hold opinions essentially and existentially in conflict with my own. And I struggle to be in relationship. I avoid it most of the time. It is a comfortable, though entirely inadequate response to avoid it. It's a risk-averse position, and I'm not going to grow intellectually or spiritually from such a choice. I don't want to talk about the risk of terrorism from refugees. I want to talk about how immigrants take American jobs. I definitely don't want to talk about how some of us are inherently lesser than because of our skin color or sexuality. I don't want to talk about ingesting urine as a medical therapy either. That's not the important one. Here's the consequence of not engaging those ideas, of not entering into community with those whose opinions are so vastly and painfully different. We run the risk of presiding over the demise of the society that we hold most dear. We run the risk of losing what makes us who we are. By refusing the risk of relationship, we risk the loss of freedom, of the pursuit of truth, of the chance to feel the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We risk fraying even further the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. And so often, even here in the spaces of safety and comfort, we are only tepidly risking relationship with each other. I was talking with a friend, a member of another UU church, and she shared an experience she had during the Sunday service. She knew that sometimes when she listened to the sermon, she would feel drawn in and emotional, and she would say under her breath in response, "Mercy. Mercy." A cry for compassion, a cry for understanding, a cry to something beyond herself for aid and solace. The person sitting next to her on one Sunday, a person she considers a friend, whispered back, "Oh, don't say that. There's no mercy. There's no one to give it." I found this story shocking. One UU correcting another on a matter of personal belief. One UU telling another what to think about God. I was stunned and saddened. When our beliefs and our attitudes give us license to determine beliefs and attitudes for others, relationship is broken. And according to my friend, her friend didn't seem to know. And yet, brokenness is the place to begin, the only place from which to take that risk of relationship. And vulnerability the admission of brokenness, and the willingness to put it on display, to fly it to a foreign country, to drive it down the wrong side of a 4-lane highway. Vulnerability is the only place from which to repair relationship. We are weary and mistaken. We don't feel so much at ease as uneasy, unsure, even when we assert, even when we become most adamant. Doubt lingers, cluing us into the separation between us, marking the loss of relationship as we fuel our ideas, our feelings, our experiences into a frenzy of asserted assured. We all need to be assured that we are loved and valued, that someone or something will tend to our safety and protect us in the face of loss. It's the bridge of relationship, forged from the risk of sharing and the risk of listening. That's what will save us. It's the bridge of relationship that strengthens us and promises us that we belong, that we deserve to be part of the company. It is the bridge of relationship that makes a community strong, that makes a community at all. The great writer Madeleine L'Engle said, "When we were children, we used to think that when we were grown up, we would no longer be vulnerable. But to grow up is to accept vulnerability. To be alive is to be vulnerable. When we see this, when we feel it, when we allow this to take hold of us, to change us, we become ripe for the risk of relationship." In relationship, all those different trucks and cars and motorbikes and human beings in the streets of India's cities, they manage somehow, mostly not to kill each other. They manage somehow to make a place on the road for everyone. We form community out of difference and the willingness to forge connections between those differences. If we find ourselves on the wrong side of the highway occasionally, we can trust that others will make way for us before we crash. Can we make room for each other, friends? Can we open ourselves to our differences? Can we entertain rather than crush or ignore them? Can we seek connection rather than retreating to the risk-free safety of our isolated ideas? Can we hold each other in our weariness and confusion? Can we be for each other the mercy for which each of us cries out that each of us needs? Friends, let us try. Let us make promises that we will take the risk of exposure, of vulnerability, of sharing, of listening. Let us keep these promises. Yes, friends, let us promise this today and every day as you remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are welcome, and you are needed. May you feel so.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.